I'm excited to finally show you my ClaudeOS personal operating system. It's a system that has completely transformed how I work with AI and has given me a dramatic strategic advantage in how I spend my time, how I'm able to deliver and focus on value, and automate a lot of the tediousness that comes with managing projects. You'll find a lot of tutorials out there on using Claude projects individually, but this is different. This is an AI operating system that delivers persistent memory, cross-project intelligence, and dynamic evolution capabilities. So what is ClaudeOS? ClaudeOS is a system of projects working together intelligently. Projects are able to share knowledge and coordinate. Documents are organized and routed to the right place automatically. And with integrations like Gmail and Calendar, this system acts like a true business assistant. If you're like me and get lost in the details and have tons of emails to stay on top of, this system is perfect for you. The main unlocks here are the ability to remain value focused, to have intelligence across projects, the scalability of enabling the system to easily spin up new projects, and getting to a level where I'm asking Claude to plan my day, it's reading my emails, it knows all of my projects, it sees my calendar, and it has injected a new energy into doing work for me. So maybe that sounds corny, but let me show you how this works. Before we get into it, my name is Adam. Thank you for coming to the Viable Edge YouTube channel. I'm here to talk about vibe marketing and bringing AI systems to accelerate how small and medium businesses get more value for their dollars and regain control of things that are typically managed by third parties or agencies. If you like what you see, please subscribe. Visit theviableedge.com for more content like this. And there will be a guide below that has all of the documentation and instructions on how to set up ClaudeOS for yourself. If you have any questions or feedback, please leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you. And with that, let's get right into the demo. Let's take a look at ClaudeOS. I've created 4 sample projects here. I thought a fun analogy for the interconnectivity is a band, right? You have guitar, drums, keyboards, and bass. Each player in this band needs to coordinate with each other and be in lockstep. So I think this is a really fun analogy for showing how these projects can work. I recorded this earlier and the audio did not work. So I'm running through the recording again and doing a second voiceover. So bear with me on that. Clicking into the guitar project, you can see that it's a completely empty project. And we're going to set this up using ClaudeOS. ClaudeOS is powered by an MCP server called ClaudeOS. That's built in N8N and has only 3 tools that are enabling all of this functionality. On the right side is the Google Drive, and you can see that ClaudeOS has a parent directory, and then within that directory, there are 2 folders, the System Core and Project Knowledge. We will start with the ClaudeOS System Core files, and I'm going to show you how a project is set up in ClaudeOS. One thing to be aware of here is that we're using the Claude project instructions to reference a Google Doc that will have the actual instructions. That's what enables the dynamic evolving instructions and persistent knowledge, because Claude can update the Google Doc and then reference that Google Doc as its set of instructions. So going into the System Core folder, there's 4 files here. 2 of these are used in every project in the ClaudeOS system. The Claude Project Tool Usage Guide, which explains to the project how to use the tools in the MCP server. And then there's the Claude Personal Operating System, which is the instructions for the Claude operating system itself. I also have my personal email style guide included in all of my projects, so my writing is consistent, and when I ask Claude to create content, it's always using my voice and my style. The 4th file here is not used in the project, but it's the template that I copy and paste the instructions into for the actual project. So if we open that file, I'm just going to grab all of that text right there and drop it right into the Claude project instructions. And what this is effectively doing, it's pointing the project instructions to 3 specific files per project and saying, hey, Claude, your instructions are actually over here. Go and read them comprehensively and completely. And those 3 files are the instructions for that specific project, the tool usage guide, and the personal operating system instructions. And on the bottom, there's a block of text just to ensure that Claude will fully read all of the instructions before doing any actions. And that's in response to challenges I was having earlier on where Claude would start doing things before fully reading the instructions, and it was creating issues, but that's been resolved. So the template instructions have placeholder for what will eventually be the project-specific instructions. So you'll see once we set up the project and those instructions are created, we'll come back here and we'll replace the file name with the actual instructions after they're created. So let's save that. And the next step is to add the tool use guide and the ClaudeOS instructions to project knowledge. And that'll take a second to load in. Adding the tools. Great. So let's go back into the Google Drive because we'll watch the project build itself. So we're going to go into the project knowledge folder where each project has its own folder where its own files will live. And I'm going to prompt the creation of the guitar project using my voice. So the prompt is, this is a new project on guitar playing, learning guitar, and coordinating with my band, which includes a drummer, a keyboardist, and a bass player. Set up the project for me. So now the project will read the existing instructions and confirm that it has read them fully. I'll allow the MCP tool. And you can see that the first step is that it's creating a new folder for this project, which will show up in the project knowledge in just a moment. There it is. And if we open that, we'll start to see the initial setup documents be created. So it's going to set up 3 files, and we can see them coming in right now. The project instructions, project metadata, which has information such as which folder to work in, and a status report, which is a file that's intended to be shared with other related projects. So those projects can see the status of the guitar project. And we'll take a look at how that works in a bit. So once it creates the files, Claude will start populating the content, and this all happens automatically. And it's following the instructions in the ClaudeOS to know what to do. This is my favorite part, watching the content come in. There it is. That was the status document. I'm sorry, this is the status document. And there's the content. Just like that. It knows what to do because all of this is coming from the ClaudeOS operating instructions. So those files have been created, and now we have to add these files into the project knowledge. Sometimes it takes a moment for these files to show up. If that happens, all you need to do is refresh or give it a minute. Great. And there they are. So those 3 new files will now be added to the project knowledge. And essentially, the project is nearly complete. The new files are added into project knowledge. And now the next step is to edit the instructions and replace the placeholder file name with the new file name of our instructions for this project. So now Claude, whenever we start a new chat, will go through each of those 3 files to make sure it has the full context on what this project is and how it works. And that's it. Our guitar project is set up and ready to go, and we can start prompting it. The prompt is, create a weekly practice agenda for me and add that to the project knowledge. So you can see that Claude is now creating a new doc, and we'll see that show up in the folder. There it is, just showed up. And now it's populating the content in that document. And all of this is happening in real time, automatically leveraging that MCP server and those 3 simple tools. So we've created a project, we've created new documentation for that project. And now that project has the ability to be dynamically updated and have persistent ongoing memory of whatever the latest is. There's the practice agenda, and it's going to be added to the project knowledge. So now let's provide an update. Great. So I want you to remember that the bassist's name is Mike, the drummer's name is John, and the keyboardist's name is Paige. So we're providing specific details for the guitar project. And you may see where this is going, but there's relevance for the other projects here now too. It didn't update the knowledge on this first prompt, So I had to give it more explicit instructions to make sure that it remembers those details. And that's the prompt coming in now. Can you please make sure that the instructions are updated to include those details? So now it's updating the project instructions that are specific for the guitar project. And one thing to note is that within the ClaudeOS instructions, there are rules against updating the ClaudeOS documentation. So that is a safeguard to prevent the guitar project from disrupting the entire ClaudeOS system. Because if it makes changes to the ClaudeOS instructions, that'll impact every project that is also using it. Great. So the instructions have been updated with that additional detail. So what just happened is the guitar project updated its own instructions. Super handy. Now, I believe this prompt was updating the status. Can you also update our status report to make sure that we're fully up to date and that it's aware of our band members? So the status document is what is intended to be shared with other related projects, so those projects can have visibility into whatever the latest status is for the projects that are sharing out. So our guitar project is now up to date, and any other project that is using its status document will know what the latest news is with guitar. And you can see that it just updated. It has the details about the band members. So now the project status is updated and the details about the band members are being reported out. So now let's move on and set up the drum project so we can see how these two projects might interact with each other. In the same way that we set up the guitar project, we'll set up the drum project. We're going to add the two important ClaudeOS documents, the tools guide and the ClaudeOS operating instructions, which are located in the system core directory. And once those files are in there, we'll prompt it to set up the rest. Great. And now we're grabbing the instruction template, which has the placeholder file name, saving those right in. And then we'll prompt the creation of the remaining documents and the setup of this project. And before we start that one, I'm also adding the guitar status to this project upon creation because it has details that we want to be known by the drum project, which are not known yet. So adding the guitar status document to drums. So drums now sees what the latest news is with guitar. And now I'm going to prompt the setup. And the prompt is, this is a new ClaudeOS project for the drums of this band. Can you please set up the project and take a look at the guitar and band coordination project in your project knowledge? So now it's following the instructions and looking at the initial setup documents and the ClaudeOS operating system instructions and the tools guide. And the first thing it's going to do is set up a folder. There's the folder. And now it's going to be creating the initial files within that folder, which are the instructions, the status reporter, and the project metadata file, which has information such as the directory that the files are living in. Great. So it has the information about the band that we only gave to the guitar project, right? So the guitar project captured those details, recorded it in its own status, which was included in the setup for the drums project, which now has those same details. And those details will be included in the drum's own project instructions. So it has that information ongoing. It's important to remember to add the new files into the project knowledge once they're created and to replace the placeholder file name with the file name of the newly created project instructions for drums. And that's it. The project is now set up. We're going back to the guitar project, and now we're going to add the drum status to guitar. So now guitar can see what drums is doing, and drums can see what guitar is doing. So the next prompt is, I'm the leader of the band, and I'm planning a set for our show next week, and I want to play Weaselface and Bubblehead, two of our best songs. So Claude is again confirming that the instructions have been read. And Claude's asking, would you like me to create a setlist planning document that includes the arrangement notes and coordination details for Weaselface and Bubblehead? And I'm prompting back, yes, I would like for you to create a plan for this, but we can use the status to capture that plan, right? So I don't want to create too many documents. So I'm giving it an explicit instruction to use the status for this level of detail and information capture. And that's something that I can build into the project instructions if I want this project to behave that way. In that case, I would just say, update the guitar project instructions to include all of our setlist planning in the status updates. I don't typically go and look in the drive every time the file's being updated or created. I actually keep that closed and just use Claude. But for the sake of this demo, I'm just showing you what's going on behind the scenes. So Weaselface and Bubblehead are now in the status document. And let's go to drums. Drums needs to get on the ball with practicing for the set. The prompt is, can you help me plan which songs I need to practice? Now, keep in mind, I didn't tell the drums project which songs we're practicing. It read the status and it sees that Weaselface and Bubblehead are on the menu for the show. So that's a great, simple example of this interaction, right? We're looking at how these two projects are communicating with each other, how they're keeping tabs on each other's up-to-date statuses, and how this is all being facilitated through dynamic documentation, which is effectively giving it ongoing and evolving memory. So to give you an overview how this works and how I manage this, this is my master project down here. And each project has that document that reports out, right? So for my master project, I sort of have my personal advisory board that I use to manage my business and have visibility into everything, both professional and personal projects. I have 2 personal projects. This is just an example, but they have their own status documents that are then reporting into master. And then for my clients, each client project might have a series of projects reporting into it, each managing a different thing, not unlike a marketing organization, right? So for client B over here, that's purple, I have a content project reporting into client B, a competitive project reporting in, and so forth. And then client B is capturing all of that information and reporting into master. And that's how I set up my client projects. So it's a great, effective way to keep things organized. So now I'm going to walk you through how to set this up. Here's a look at what you'll need. And it's not a lot. All you'll really need for this is a premium Claude account to enable MCP functionality. You're going to want the Claude desktop client for Mac or Windows, although this will also work in the browser version of Claude, which is a new feature that they just released. And I'll show you how to set that up. And you're going to need N8N. You need to have Google Drive integrated with Claude as well, which is a built-in integration. Before getting into the N8N workflows, I wanted to quickly run through the system core files and explain a little bit more about the thought process here. So I explained earlier during the demo that there's 2 critical files that are required for ClaudeOS: the operating system instructions themselves and the tool usage guide on how to use the MCP server tools. So just to take a look in these files for a moment, there's a lot of information about guardrails and what the projects are allowed or not allowed to do. And there's also information on which files to set up. We saw it set up instructions and we saw it set up metadata. I wanted to have this metadata file so I'm prepared that there's other workflows that are built on. So you can see that there's even information about forward-looking items with agentic capabilities. In the ClaudeOS are instructions such as access control hierarchy, right? And it has instructions such as this: can update system core files only with explicit user approval. Read-only access. So my point being that the OS instructions have all of these guardrails and rules that I built in over time as I started using this and plugging all of the leaks and figuring out everything that was breaking. And it's at the point now where it's working really well. So this file will be included in the guide. And then the other file is the MCP tool use guide, which goes into depth on those 3 tools that we're going to review in the workflow and that you saw in action in the demo, and explains what each one is used for, how to use it, and how to structure and send the data so that it's usable. This also contains information about how the projects are all assigned a folder, how to identify the correct folder, how to route documents, when to update knowledge, that sort of stuff. Again, spent a lot of time working out the kinks and getting this to a state where it's working extremely reliably. And then finally, we looked at this in the demo, but this will also be included in the guide. This is the template for the Claude project instructions. So this does not need to be edited. When a new project is being set up, all you need to do is copy and paste this directly into the Claude project instructions box. Once the project-specific instructions are made, be sure to replace this placeholder with that file name. And on that note, one thing I will say is that this system does use a lot of context. When you're updating and creating documents, you'll be hitting your limits. I personally use the lower level max plan, and that problem has completely gone away. So just have that awareness as you're working with it. I did use it with Pro for a while. It worked just as well. I just had to be a little bit more conscious about making sure I was timing my work properly so I wasn't hitting limits at the wrong time. All right, let's move on to the workflows. ClaudeOS is powered by 4 simple workflows. The first one is this MCP trigger. So when Claude wants to make a tool call, it'll trigger this server, and then it'll route the data and the operation to whatever Claude is asking it to do. So we have create a project folder, create a Google Doc, and update knowledge, which are the operations that we saw taking place in the demo every time the project was taking action. If Claude wants to execute an operation, it makes that call out to N8N. The trigger routes the job to the proper tool, and then the tool calls up one of these 3 workflows. Let's start with the simplest one first. So anytime that we create a new project, we want to create a project folder, right? So there's a simple 2-node workflow for this for Google Drive. So what's happening here is that Claude makes the call to create a new folder based on the instructions that are already written for it, and it passes the variable as a folder name, and it's set to create a new folder in my Google Drive. So the operation is create resources folder. It knows to look in my Google Drive, and it knows to go into the project knowledge server for this operation. And then it names the new folder dynamically. So Claude passes that as a variable, and this expression captures that and uses that as the folder name. And that's it. The second workflow is create a Google Doc, and it works very similarly. When the create Google Doc tool is called, the first step is that it's retrieving the proper folder ID. So it's bringing in the folder name, searching that against the drive, and then it's going to pull out the folder ID and provide that to the Google Doc creation node to create the document in the correct spot. So the ID variable is coming from that prior node, and then the title of the file is being passed through from Claude when it makes the call for this operation. And that's it. And then it creates a doc. Okay. And the third or fourth, I guess, workflow here is update knowledge, which is used whenever ClaudeOS wants to add content in or update an existing document. It's the same operation. And the way that this works is that it has to find and replace the entirety of project knowledge for whatever it's replacing. So the reason that is because you can only update Google Docs 2 ways through N8N. That's either find and replace or insert content. When we're working with project knowledge and context for AI, if we're inserting things here and there, it's going to create a lot of messiness and the context is not going to come through. Therefore, we have to allow Claude to completely rewrite the document every time it wants to make an update. So those updates are baked in and integrated naturally into the knowledge. We use the find and replace operation to identify the entirety of the content that's being replaced and to bring in the fully updated content to replace it. That is why you might have noticed all of the documentation in the project knowledge was written in Markdown because there's no formatting issues. Everything is very easy to identify and capture in one find and replace string. Markdown is just easy to work with. Okay. So the way that this works is once the tool is called and ClaudeOS wants to update project knowledge, the first step is that it's going to parse the name of the document from the content itself. When the data is sent through the MCP trigger to this update knowledge workflow, it's sending the title and the content as one blob. And this node parses out the title and the content into 2 variables. The title is used to identify the correct file name to retrieve and update. We now have a title variable and we have a content variable. The title variable is used in the search query, and that's what enables this node to retrieve the correct document. Then in get current documents, it's taking that output in the form of the document ID, getting that document. So this is pulling the existing content from the document that we want to update, right? So the get operation pulls that content into its own variable. And then the final node uses that content in the old text field, right? So this variable is pulled into the old text field, and the content coming from the parser is the content that we're updating it with. And that goes into the new text field, right? So the find and replace is matching the entirety of the content that's in this variable with what's in the document, and then replacing it with this. That's why using Markdown is much easier and allows this to work. And one other thing to note is that from the retrieval node that we looked at earlier in the chain, the ID is what is being used to identify the correct file. So just to run through that again at a high level, when we're updating knowledge, the data's coming through the MCP trigger is triggering this workflow. That's what the first node is. It's parsing out from what is a string of text, the title and the body of content. It's matching the correct document to update based on the title, and it's pulling the ID. This node is identifying the content to retrieve, and then this node is finding and replacing that content with the new content coming in. And that's it. To set this up, go to the link below and get the guide. That will include the JSON templates for uploading these workflows directly into N8N. But it's so simple and you can set it up without that. When you set up an MCP server trigger and you open it up here, you're going to see a string of characters in the path. And that string of characters will reflect what's in the URL, both for your test and production URLs. The URL is what connects Claude to N8N. And I'm going to show you how to set that up. It's super easy. So once you're in Claude, I use the desktop version 90% of the time, but this also works in the browser version. If you're a paying customer, you have remote MCP capability. What you're going to do is you're going to go to your settings and you're going to click on integrations and then add integration. And in the integration URL, you are going to grab your MCP production URL and paste it right in there. And then you can call it whatever you like, ClaudeOS. Okay. Because this is an unofficial integration with Anthropic, they'll throw up this little flag. But if you're using N8N, I don't think you really have much to worry about. And then you add it. And that is it. That's all you need to do to get an MCP server integrated with Claude. You used to have to mess with config JSON files. That's now a thing of the past. There's a cute little N8N logo there, flag that it's a custom integration. And you can also edit the name if you need to. You could even change settings about the behaviors of the specific tools, right? You can determine if you want Claude to always ask permission anytime it calls one of these tools, which actually is very handy in some cases. So once that is connected, we have these three tools here, right? And we walked through each of the workflows that each one of these calls. So let's look first at how this project folder node is set up. You can see there's not really a lot of setup here. I'm using the database source, which indicates that we're going to choose one of the existing workflows that's already in our N8N instance. And then once that is set up, you'll see that there's a list of workflows that'll be here. You want to choose the workflow for create folder. You got to set up the tools first so that when you set up the trigger, you can point to the tools. And the input for setting up the folder is the folder name, right? That's the information that Claude is passing through to that tool. It wants to set up a folder. All it needs to really tell the tool is the folder name to use. And you can choose to have that defined automatically by the model, which is a great feature. This will also pull the variable from the tool itself, right? So if we go into the create folder tool, we can see that there's a variable set for JSON folder name, right? And if we look in the trigger, the node that is prior, that same variable folder name is set up as a string, which is text. And once the MCP trigger tool is set up to point to that workflow, it'll pull in that variable name, right? So you have to work backwards when you're setting up workflows. At least that's how I do it. So it's as simple as that. And again, the templates will be included in the guide with the link below. Let's take a look at Create Google Doc. So we looked at the workflow before, and in this case, there's two variables flowing through. We have the project folder name, and we have the title of the document that we want to create. And again, those two variables are actually pulled from the node that is connected to the tool here. So the Create Google Doc tool has these two variables, which it pulled from the Create Google Doc workflow. So this trigger is set up with those two variables, right? So project folder and title. So we already walked through this workflow in more detail, but working backwards to the MCP trigger and going back into our Create Google Doc, again, there are those two variables. The tool guide that is included in the system core folder, right, that gets added to every project, has all of the instructions on which variables to include with each tool. And then finally, with update project knowledge, we looked at how the title and the content of the document are coming through in one string. So there's no variable to assign in this tool. And that is why we have the parser in the update knowledge workflow. I'll go back to that for a moment. We talked about how the data for update knowledge is just coming through as one blob of text, right? This is that blob of text. We can even see the last data that was sent through is the guitar and band coordination. That's the title. And the rest of this is the content, right? And so this parser then separates the title from the content. And all this is some JavaScript code, which is very easy to create. I use ChatGPT or Claude to create this code just by explaining what I need to happen. And then we walked through the rest of the workflow earlier. And that's it. Revisiting our guitar project, our tools that we just looked at are showing up in the search and tools button in the chat box. The custom integrations will appear below the out of the box integrations. I don't know why these are turned off. I'll select a different model. So ClaudeOS, that's what I named the integration in the settings. And then the tools here reflect what the tools are called in the MCP trigger. Simple. This is how any N8 and MCP trigger can be set up. So if you know how to do that, you can create any workflow and connect it to Claude. That's really the value that I love for people to take away from these videos is get creative, figure out how you can create things for yourself. And these are really simple workflows. Really, it doesn't get more simple than this. And the thing that I really like about ClaudeOS is that Claude does all the heavy lifting. All of the tools that are connected to it and integrated are really just data pipelines, transferring content and data back and forth. Some of the ideas that I've had to build on this, and I think I'm going to do a V2 for ClaudeOS, is self-updating project status. I can create another workflow that is triggered on a timed basis or triggered when it sees a document get updated. There's any number of triggers that you can use. For example, maybe once a day or once a week, I set up an AI node to update and consolidate project knowledge on a per project basis, which would create automatic project status updates. Or I could set up a workflow to read my email before I wake up in the morning and provide an email brief in my project on a per client basis. And if you keep thinking along those lines, you really start to understand that there's so many different creative possibilities that you can use to streamline how you work. And all of this is really great experience on building these kinds of automations and tools and really understanding how you can get the most out of working with AI. So anyway, there's going to be a guide linked below this video. If you have any feedback, please share it. If you have any questions or if you're running into issues, please don't hesitate to comment. I wouldn't mind if you wanted to subscribe. Visit theviableedge.com. If you end up using ClaudeOS, please share your experience. If you have ideas on how to expand it, would love to hear about it. Thank you so much for watching this. I truly appreciate it. Take care.